Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with Debunking Atheists, Volume 3? I want to go over two common atheistic objections to the existence of God. The first is special pleading. The special pleading objection um, goes like this. Well, if you're going to say that everything is caused, then God has to be caused as well. You can't simply accept God from the general rule that everything else is caused, because that would be a case of special pleading. Um, so, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If everything else is caused, then so must God. Uh, the answer to this is, well, special pleading only applies if there is no justifiable exception. If you can show that the exception to the general rule is justified, then there is no special pleading fallacy. So, why is God being uncaused a justifiable exception when everything else is caused? Well, the answer to that is that anything that is made of parts is caused by those parts. Why is that? Well, the destruction of something is the disassociation of parts. If you have parts, then those parts can be disassociated, which means that the thing with parts can be destroyed. And if a thing can be destroyed by parts, then it must be caused by those parts. If those parts are disassociated, that thing no longer exists. And therefore, one can say that the parts cause the thing. So the universe is all parts. Everywhere you look, there's parts. That's undeniably true. Um, so the universe itself, being made of parts, cannot be uncaused, because if you disassociate those parts, you destroy the universe that was there at that moment in time, and it's no longer there. So it has to have been caused by those parts. Sure, there's a new version of the universe every moment of time as the parts move, but the universe itself is totally comprised of parts. So it has to be a caused thing. Even the singularity, or the expanded singularity in Big Bang cosmology, started out as an almost infinitesimal speck of all reality, energy, and matter that existed in the universe. But that little speck expanded, and that little speck no longer exists. The remnants of it, as it expands and cools, is our universe today. But the speck itself is not there anymore. Even that is not uncaused. If it was uncaused, it couldn't disappear. It would still be here. And it's not. What you have is an expanded universe. You don't have that speck anymore. So, because the universe is made of parts, it has to be caused. Whereas God is not made of parts. God is uncaused. Something that is not made of parts cannot be destroyed, because destruction is the disassociation of parts. So, because God doesn't have parts, God cannot be destroyed, which means God is not caused by those parts, which means God is not caused. God is uncaused. Um, so God is a justifiable exception to the general rule that all things are caused. So God is not uh, a special pleading fallacy. The atheists are wrong about that. The second atheist objection I want to talk about is a very serious objection to the existence of God. It's probably the number one atheist objection to the existence of God, and that is the problem of evil. Now, the problem of evil uh, says this: well, if God is all good or omnibenevolent, then why does he allow evil things to happen in the world? Doesn't the fact that evil occurs prove that an omnibenevolent God does not exist? Because why would he allow evil if he was omnibenevolent, if he was all good? Why does a good God let bad things happen? That's the problem of evil objection. Now, notice that the problem of evil uh, objection refers to an omnibenevolent God. So the problem of evil objection doesn't apply to something like the cosmological arguments, because the cosmological arguments don't prove an omnibenevolent God. They'll prove the other omnis, like omnipotence, omniscience, um, omnipresence, but they don't prove omnibenevolence. So the problem of evil is really outside the realm of uh, the cosmological arguments. And this is more of an attack on specifically the nature of God, the Judeo-Christian understanding of the nature of God. So there have been many attempts through the centuries to answer this question, the problem of evil. And they possible answers include, well, God allows evil so that people can have free will, and it's people's choice to be evil, not God's choice. But he has to allow it to give people the opportunity to decide for themselves. That's one possible answer. Another possible answer is, well, uh, Satan exists, and Satan is constantly tempting people to commit evil. So it's really Satan's fault. That's why evil exists. Another attempt at answering this question is the idea that, well, whatever the evil is, it's still part of God's plan, and it's still for the better. It's still for the good. It's just that because you're not God, you don't see the big picture of how everything works. You don't realize that this is part of God's good plan, because your sight is limited, because you're a human being. And if you were God, you would understand how this was actually ultimately a good thing. I have my own uh, answer to this question, and it's unique, but I also think it really cuts to the heart of the whole thing. And my answer is the problem of evil is really the problem of evolution. Evolution is the process by which life is created. And it's a process that's very nasty and, in many respects, evil. It involves a lot of killing and bad things happening, but it also is what progresses the engineered DNA that all life contains and makes it capable of surviving in its environment. But evolution has a nasty side to it, no doubt about it. But there's a lot of evil in evolution. So evil is caused by evolution. I don't know why people blame God, but it's caused by evolution. All life requires evolution to exist. And all life is what creates evil. So evolution is the cause of evil, not God. So the question is, well, why does God allow evolution to exist? So my argument is this: evil is caused by evolution. Evolution is necessary for life to exist in physical reality. God chooses to allow evil to exist because it is the greater good to create life. So you might say, well, why does God have to use evolution? Can he create life some other way? And the answer is no. Evolution is the only known way to create life. Evolution is the only known means of developing DNA for life to exist. So even if God poofed a human being into existence, that human being still has to have DNA. And that DNA still has to exist based on a process of evolution. There is no other way to create life except through the use of evolution. So, in order for life to exist, God must use evolution. It's a greater good that life exists, even though it involves evolution, which brings in evil, than for life not to exist at all. It is better that you exist. It is for the greater good that you exist than that you don't exist. And that's why God permits evolution. He has no choice. You either use evolution to create life or there's no life. Now, you might say, well, you're limiting God's power. You're saying God has to use evolution. Isn't God all powerful, omnipotent? Couldn't God use some other means? Well, there isn't any other means. Life requires evolution and DNA. There's no other way to do it. And it's not a limitation on God's power that God can't create life some other way. That's not a limitation on power. What that is it's a discussion of what real powers actually exist. If there is no real power anywhere that could create life through some means other than evolution, then you're not talking about a real power. You're talking about an illusory power. God doesn't lose omnipotence because he doesn't have an illusory power. If the power isn't real or is not capable of being real, the fact that God doesn't have it doesn't make him less powerful. It's an illusory power. It's like a square circle. Can God create a square circle? Of course not, because square circles are incoherent. They're illogical. They can't exist. They're not logically possible. There is no power that can create a square circle. So the fact that God doesn't have an illusory power, like the power to create a square circle, does not mean that God's power is limited or that God is not omnipotent. Omnipotence simply means God has all real powers that are real, that exist. That doesn't mean that God has impossible powers or illusory powers. And evolution is just like that. Creating life without evolution is an illusory power. It's an impossible power. It doesn't exist in reality. It's not a knock on God's omnipotence that he has to use evolution. It's simply a fact that evolution is the only way that life can come into being. So God is forced to use evolution. And that means God is forced to allow evil, or no life would exist. And no reasonable person is going to argue that it's better that life not exist just to avoid the evil of evolution. So I think every reasonable person would agree that it's better to exist than not to exist because you're afraid of evolution. Okay. So those are the two objections and the answers, the debunking of those atheist objections for today. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and press the subscribe button. I appreciate it. Take care.